Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the soft, lantern-lit glow of Tang-Dynasty Chang'an, a city so full of life it feels like the center of the universe. Because, well, for the Tang, it kind of was. The air hums with the sound of wooden wheels on stone, the low murmur of traders calling out their goods, and somewhere in the distance, a flute player working through the same four notes over and over again. You can almost smell the faint sweetness of roasted tea drifting on the breeze, though you'll have to dodge the less pleasant smells from the camel caravans. And fair warning, if you've never walked 12 miles in sandals before, you probably won't survive this little time travel stroll without a few blisters. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is right now for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start on a wide avenue, the packed earth road, dusted with a fine pale powder that sticks to your shoes. Shop signs hang like painted flags overhead, each carved or brushed with bold characters. The Tang capital is at its peak, cosmopolitan, crowded, and endlessly noisy, but somehow the rhythm of the street lulls you instead of exhausting you. A passing cart squeaks by, piled high with lacquer chests, and a man leading a goat tugs the animal away from nibbling at a silk vendor's tassels. It's spring, which means the peach trees are in bloom, scattering petals into the gutters. Somewhere to your right, a brazier pops as chestnuts roast. Somewhere to your left, someone pours boiling water over tea leaves, releasing that grassy, toasted scent. That, you decide, is the thread you'll follow through this labyrinth of streets. A boy in a red cap rushes past with a covered basket. He's balancing it carefully, maybe tea cakes for a private house, maybe something more exotic. Historians still argue whether Chang'an's tea trade in this period leaned more toward compressed bricks or loose leaf for the urban elite. Whatever the truth, the demand is unmistakable. Shop after shop along this district sells tea, from the cheapest, most bitter brews for laborers to delicate, perfumed varieties destined for the court. You pause to watch a street performer balance on one leg while holding a teacup in the other hand. A small crowd giggles as he pretends to drink without spilling a drop, though you suspect that cup's been empty all afternoon. A woman next to you mutters that his act was better last year before he went soft. You smile and move on, brushing past silk-robed scholars and dusty-booted porters. Further ahead, the avenue narrows into a market lane. Overhead, stretched fabric awnings cast striped shadows across the stalls. One vendor calls out that his tea leaves are fresh from the southern hills, plucked before sunrise, tender as the emperor's own skin. Another shouts about tea strong enough to wake a sleeping ox. The claims are outrageous, but the fragrance is real. You pass a row of low tables where customers squat on stools, sipping from thick ceramic cups while gossiping about a new poetry contest at the eastern gate. A man with an abacus sits at the corner, tallying what looks like bundles of wrapped leaves. Each bundle is tied with colored twine, red for the stronger roast, green for the lighter. A customer waves a hand to sample the scent, then nods approvingly. You notice that the merchant's fingers are stained a soft brown, not from ink, but from the endless handling of tea leaves. Turning a corner, you nearly bump into a foreign trader, Persian perhaps, judging by the embroidered tunic and neatly trimmed beard. His goods? Not spices this time, but sacks of dried fruits to sweeten the tea, a taste that's just starting to catch on here. He grins, points at your empty hands, and offers you a fig. You take it, chew slowly, and note how the syrupy sweetness lingers, imagining it mingling with hot, slightly bitter Tang tea. Overhead, the rooftops of Chang'an's grand houses form an uneven skyline against the pale sky. You can hear pigeons cooing and the distant clip-clop of horses in the main square. Somewhere, a monk chants, the low notes weaving through the market's noise. The rhythm of the city is hypnotic. No rushing, no sharp interruptions, just the flow of trade, conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter when someone overpays for mediocre tea. You stop again when you spot a small side stall draped in faded blue cloth. Inside, the merchant isn't calling out to passers-by. Instead, he's quietly pouring tea for a single customer, moving with slow, deliberate grace. You linger outside for a moment, drawn by the way the steam curls and vanishes in the sunlight, thinking that maybe, just maybe, you've found the perfect doorway to step through next. You duck under the low blue awning and step into the dim, cool space of the tea stall. The noise of the street muffles instantly, replaced by the quiet hiss of water just about to boil. The merchant, a man of about 50 with neatly combed hair and a robe the color of moss after rain, glances up briefly but doesn't speak. He's in the middle of pouring, tilting a spouted bronze kettle with the precision of someone who's been doing this for decades. The customer across from him is a scholar, judging by the ink stains on his sleeves and the rolled bamboo slips beside his cup. The scholar nods politely to you, but his attention is fixed on the rising steam. It swirls in slow-motion ribbons before melting into the air, carrying with it a scent that's green, toasty, and faintly floral. You ease yourself onto a low stool, which creaks just enough to remind you it's been here longer than some dynasties will last. The merchant finishes the pour and slides a cup toward the scholar without spilling a drop. Then, still silent, he measures out a pinch of fresh leaves from a carved wooden box. The leaves are curled tightly, almost like little sleeping snails, each one a dark jade color. He gestures for you to lean closer. You do, and he lets a few leaves fall into your palm. They're warm, as if they've been resting in the sun. When you lift them to your nose, you catch a scent so layered it's hard to pin down. Fresh grass, roasted nuts, and something like the sweetness of morning rain on stone. Historians still argue whether Tang tea at its peak was roasted to enhance flavor, or primarily to preserve it for the long journeys from the southern provinces. Either way, you decide you could happily sit here smelling these leaves all afternoon. The merchant finally speaks, his voice low and almost gravelly. He asks where you're from, and when you say a little far away, he raises an eyebrow but doesn't press. Instead, he begins measuring leaves into a shallow clay bowl. His movements are slow and deliberate, like a calligrapher about to write the first stroke of a poem. You notice the small collection of kettles hanging behind him. Bronze, iron, and even one made of thick porcelain. Each is slightly dented or darkened from years of use. Above them, a shelf holds bundles of tea wrapped in silk cloth. Some are marked with brush-painted characters naming the province. Others have no labels at all, the merchant apparently trusting his own memory more than any tag. As he works, he talks about the hills in Jiangxi where the leaves in front of you were grown. He says the best tea bushes cling to rocky slopes, forcing their roots deep, which gives the leaves a mineral note you can taste even after a long brew. You picture the plants small and stubborn, clinging to cliffs in misty dawn light. He offers you a cup of his latest infusion. The liquid is pale gold with the faintest green tint if you hold it to the light. You take a sip. The first taste is almost nothing, just warmth. Then, as you swallow, it blooms into a smooth, nutty sweetness that lingers at the back of your tongue. A slow smile creeps across the merchant's face like he's just confirmed something important. Outside, the sounds of the market carry in faintly. A burst of laughter, the call of a seller hawking oranges, the shuffling of sandals on stone. But in here, it's as if time has slowed. Even the scholar takes his cup in two hands, lifting it carefully, pausing to watch the steam before sipping. The merchant mentions, almost in passing, that one of his regular customers is a court musician who claims his best compositions come only after drinking this exact tea. Whether that's true or just good marketing, you can't say, but you like the idea. After all, what's the harm in believing a cup of tea might coax out a masterpiece? You glance toward the doorway and see a pair of young servants pass by, carrying a heavy crate between them. On the side is stamped a single character, cha, tea. You smile at the thought that this humble leaf is important enough to have its own mark, its own trade routes, its own stories stretching across mountains and deserts. The merchant begins preparing another round, this time whisking the leaves in a shallow bowl with a bamboo tool. The froth gathers at the edges, and he pours it into a smaller cup for you to try. This version is earthier, with a faint bitterness that somehow makes it more refreshing. He watches your reaction closely, as if reading tea leaves. Not in the fortune-telling sense, but in the way a craftsman gauges the worth of his work. Somewhere outside, a temple bell rings twice, its deep notes rolling through the air. The scholar gathers his bamboo slips, bows to the merchant, and slips away. You're left alone with the hiss of the kettle and the faint scent of roasted leaves, wondering just how many cups of tea have been poured in this room over the years, each one quietly anchoring a moment in someone's life. You linger in the stall as the merchant begins arranging small bundles of tea on the low counter, each wrapped in textured paper tied with fine twine. He invites you to look closer, and with a practiced flick of his wrist, he unties one. Inside is a compact disc of tea, compressed so tightly it feels more like a polished stone than dried leaves. He says this one came from the mountains of Fujian, carried by mule for 12 days to reach Chang'an. You lift the disc and inhale. The scent is deeper, darker than the loose leaves you tried earlier. Wood smoke and dried plum with a faint medicinal undertone. Historians still argue whether compressed tea in the Tang was more for convenience and transport or because the aging process was thought to improve the flavor. The merchant chuckles, saying it's both, but also adds that tea sellers like things that stack neatly. Practicality, you suppose, doesn't hurt. Next, he shows you a small lacquer box containing loose leaf tea, long, delicate strands, twisted into elegant shapes like fine calligraphy strokes. This variety, he says, comes from gardens near the Yangtze River, where the humidity and soil give the leaves their bright, grassy aroma. You swirl the box gently, watching the leaves shift like tiny green ribbons. And then there's the powdered tea. He opens a clay jar to reveal a fine, pale green powder that clings to the sides. It smells fresh, almost like crushed peas. He explains that powdered tea is whisked into hot water rather than steeped, more like drinking the leaf itself than just its essence. This, he warns with a small smirk, is an acquired taste. Some say it's the purest form, others that it's simply the quickest way to caffeinate a weary scribe. As he talks, he places each variety back in its container, almost ceremonially. It's clear that tea here is not just a drink, it's geography in miniature. Each leaf carries the soil, the climate, and even the culture of the place it came from. You imagine caravans trudging through rain, narrow boats drifting down swollen rivers, all to bring these leaves to market. Outside, a commotion swells as a street crier shouts news from the provinces. Something about a bumper harvest in the south, which makes the merchant's eyes light up. A good harvest means better quality tea and perhaps more experiments with blending. He mentions a recent trend of mixing tea leaves with dried osmanthus flowers for aroma, a practice some purists sniff at, claiming it distracts from the tea's true spirit. He pours you another cup, this one blended with a few of those yellow osmanthus petals. The first sip is like walking through a garden in late summer, floral, faintly honeyed, but still grounded in that gentle bitterness. You can see why some would adore it, and others would insist it's cheating. On a shelf behind him sits a small, battered notebook. The merchant opens it briefly to jot down a delivery order. You catch glimpses of neat brushwork listing dates, suppliers, and short notes like mild, good for evening, or bitter, only for northerners. You grin at the implied jab, though you can't tell if it's a genuine prejudice or just playful rivalry between regions. The merchant tells you of a buyer from Sogdiana who insists on tea pressed into bricks for the journey home, where it will be traded for horses and furs. In turn, those horses will end up in imperial stables and the furs in noble wardrobes. All from these humble leaves. The kettle hisses again. He ladles out water into a clay pot containing the loose-leaf Yangtze variety, letting it steep just long enough for the leaves to unfurl. When he pours, the liquid is brighter, almost shimmering. This one tastes like sunlight filtered through leaves, light, crisp, and faintly sweet. A small group enters the stall, a young woman with her elderly father. They exchange bows with the merchant, and he produces a tin of tea without a word, clearly remembering their order. As they talk quietly, you sip your cup, letting the flavors shift and linger. In the background, the low thrum of the city persists. Somewhere, a craftsman is hammering metal into shape. Somewhere else, a vendor calls out prices for dried fish. But here, time still feels measured only in the cooling of a kettle and the slow unwinding of leaves and water. The merchant packs away the teas you've seen, explaining that tomorrow he'll be receiving a small shipment from the western mountains, a place so remote that even the most seasoned traders groan at the thought of the journey. He offers to let you watch him unpack it when it arrives. You nod, already imagining the scene. New leaves, new scents, another small window into the vast, delicate world of Tang tea. The next morning, the light over Chang'an feels softer, washed in a faint mist that blurs the rooftops and makes the lanterns seem to glow even after sunrise. You set out early, drawn not by the bustle of the main avenue this time, but by the promise of the hills where these treasured leaves begin their journey. The merchant's voice from yesterday still echoes in your mind, roots deep in rocky slopes, and you decide to follow that thread all the way to its source. Of course, you're not actually hiking hundreds of li today, but your mind is a good traveler. You close your eyes for a moment and picture yourself in the southern mountains during spring harvest. The air there is cool enough to nip your fingertips, but carries the scent of damp earth and pine resin. The slopes are painted in countless shades of green, tea bushes planted in neat rows that curve like ripples on a pond. You walk between them, your sandals brushing the dew from the low branches. Every few steps, the leaves shiver in a light breeze. Here, harvesting happens at dawn, before the sun can draw out too much of the leaf's moisture. The workers, mostly women in indigo tunics with scarves tied around their hair, move with quiet efficiency. Their baskets, woven from split bamboo, rest against their backs, filling leaf by leaf. One woman pauses to greet you. She holds out a newly plucked bud between her fingers, so small it could be mistaken for a sprig of wild herb. When you rub it gently, the scent bursts forth. Fresh grass, warm hay, and something faintly sweet, like melon. Historians still argue whether Tang tea pickers used any selection rituals beyond choosing the youngest buds. Some records mention harvest chants, half song, half prayer, meant to coax good weather for the next cycle. A man nearby hums under his breath as he works. You ask about the tune and he shrugs. It's just a working song to keep pace with the plucking. You can see how rhythm matters here. Too fast and the stems might break. Too slow and you'll never fill the basket before the morning fog burns away. At the edge of the slope, a narrow stream threads through the terraces. The water is icy, fresh from the higher peaks, and the pickers occasionally dip their hands to wash away the green stain of tea resin. You crouch beside it, imagining the countless seasons it has flowed here, feeding these bushes without fanfare. From a higher ridge, you see small huts with thatched roofs, storage for the day's harvest before it's carried down to roasting sheds. Smoke curls from one, thin and blue against the mist. That's the next stage, but for now, the focus is on gathering as many perfect buds as the morning allows. One picker tells you that each bush can only be harvested a few times per year, and that the most prized leaves come from plants older than any living worker here. The roots of those bushes reach so deep that even in dry years, they draw up minerals from hidden veins in the mountain rock. That's what gives the tea its backbone, she says, patting the basket at her side. You notice a young boy darting between rows, carrying water gourds for the workers. Every so often, he stops to sneak a handful of leaves, tossing them into his mouth like snacks. The older pickers shake their heads but don't scold him. You try one yourself. Soft, pliant, faintly bitter but not unpleasant. It makes your tongue tingle. The fog begins to lift and shafts of sunlight spill down the slopes. The leaves seem to glisten now, their fine hairs catching the light. This is the signal for most workers to finish their rows and bring in the baskets. Once the sun climbs too high, the leaves start losing their volatile oils and the quality drops. Down by the huts, the baskets are weighed on simple beam scales. Each load is emptied carefully into shallow bamboo trays, ready to be taken to the roasting fires. You run your fingers through one tray. The leaves are cool and damp, and a faint green sap clings to your skin. The sensation is strangely grounding, as if you're holding the entire morning's work in your hands. Before you leave the mountains in your mind, you take one last look over the terraces. The workers are already heading home along winding paths, their laughter and soft chatter blending with the calls of distant birds. The air is lighter now, warmer, but still scented with that green, living aroma that will soon transform into something far more complex in the roasting sheds. You tuck the memory away like a leaf in a book, knowing it will steep slowly in your thoughts until the next cup. You follow the baskets of fresh tea leaves down winding paths to the roasting sheds, where the real alchemy begins. The air shifts as you approach, cool mountain mist giving way to the earthy perfume of wood smoke. A low building with open walls lets the scent drift freely, carrying notes of charred bamboo, warm leaves, and a faint sweetness that almost makes you think of baking bread. Inside, several workers move with a rhythm that's slow but unbroken, their tasks practiced into muscle memory. At the center, shallow iron pans rest over small charcoal braziers. A woman in a faded green tunic stands with her sleeves tied up, her hands disappearing into the pan as she turns the leaves in steady circles. The motion is hypnotic. Scoop, lift, drop, scoop again, each turn coaxing moisture out while sealing in flavor. She beckons you closer, handing you a small bamboo scoop. You try imitating her, but quickly discover the heat rising from the pan is more intense than it looks. The leaves stick briefly to your palms before sliding free, their texture shifting from soft and pliable to slightly leathery. She grins at your clumsy attempt, saying that it takes years to learn the right pressure. Too rough and the leaves bruise. Too gentle and they won't curl properly. Historians still argue whether Tang roasting techniques were primarily for flavor development or for preservation on long journeys. The woman here shrugs at the debate. If the tea tastes good, the reason doesn't matter, she says, tossing a fresh handful of leaves into the pan. In another corner, a man works on the rolling stage. He kneads the semi-dried leaves between his palms, then rolls them on a flat reed mat. This rolling shapes the leaves into tight curls, which both look elegant and slow the release of flavor until brewing. He hums softly as he works, occasionally pausing to flex his fingers. The faint crackle of the leaves tells you they're almost ready for drying. A younger worker tends to the drying racks, a series of tiered bamboo trays set in a warm, airy room. She spreads the rolled leaves into thin layers, letting them finish their transformation under gentle heat. Every so often, she picks up a leaf to test its snap. If it bends instead of breaking, it goes back onto the tray for more time. You notice a small side table piled with tea that looks different. Thicker, darker, almost resinous. The roaster explains that this is for compressed tea cakes. Once roasted and rolled, these leaves will be steamed lightly, then pressed into molds to create discs or bricks. She lets you lift one mold, a heavy, carved wooden press with patterns of clouds and waves. The finished cakes will carry these designs, a signature of the region's craftsmanship. The smell in here changes subtly as the day goes on. Early in the process, the scent is grassy and bright, almost like boiled vegetables. By midday, it is deepened into warm, toasty tones with faint hints of cocoa and fruit. You find yourself breathing more slowly without realizing it, as if your body's matching its rhythm to the slow roast. One worker offers you a taste of a leaf straight from the drying rack. It's brittle and crumbles slightly between your teeth, releasing a burst of concentrated flavor. Nutty, sweet, with just enough bitterness to make you want another sip of water. He laughs at your reaction and says that in his village, chewing fresh-dried leaves is a common way to test the batch. From the open side of the shed, you can see the mountains falling away into the haze. A few porters wait with baskets lined in cloth, ready to carry the finished tea down to the riverboats or up the road to the capital. It strikes you how fragile each step is. Too much heat in roasting, a careless roll, a damp drying room, and the entire flavor could change. Near the doorway, a small boy is busy sweeping stray leaves into a basket. He tells you in a whisper that sometimes he hides a handful in his sleeve to brew for himself later. The merchants never notice, he insists, though the older workers smile knowingly at his secret. By the time the last tray is cleared, the sun is dipping behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the shed. The air has cooled, but the warm scent of roasted leaves lingers on your clothes. You watch as the final batch is tied up in bundles, each stamped with a mark identifying its origin. Tomorrow, these will begin the journey northward, eventually finding their way to the very stall you visited in Chang'an. You take one last deep breath before stepping out, letting the fragrance settle in your memory like a promise of the next cup. By the time you wander back into the city, the light is shifting toward late afternoon, that golden hour when Chang'an begins to slow. Not stop, just soften. The merchant's stall is open as always, but today he waves you toward a side street, saying there's something you should see. You follow him through a narrow alley lined with carved wooden screens until the alley opens into a quiet courtyard, shaded by a canopy of old wisteria. Here stands a tea house, not the bustling, merchant-driven kind, but one meant for scholars. The wooden plaque over the entrance reads, "Pavilion of Gentle Steam and Sweeping Brushstrokes." Inside, the floor is polished so smooth you almost see your reflection, and the air carries a muted fragrance of old books mixed with the faint sweetness of tea already brewing. A group of men in loose scholars' robes sits cross-legged around a low table, their conversation pitched in that calm, deliberate tone that makes everything sound like a riddle. Scrolls and inkstones are scattered between them, though none seem to be in any hurry to work. Steam rises from a clay pot in the center, curling lazily toward the painted rafters. You're invited to sit. A young server places a cup in front of you before you've even settled in, and you notice the porcelain is thin enough that the tea's warmth seeps gently into your fingertips. The first sip is smooth with a roasted depth and a lingering floral aftertaste. One scholar leans toward you, smiling slightly, and says, "This tea tastes like the first line of a poem you haven't written yet." You're not entirely sure what he means, but you nod anyway. On the far side of the room, two older men are locked in a playful debate about a Tang poet's choice of metaphor. They pause only to refill their cups. Historians still argue whether tea houses like this were truly hubs of literary production or simply social spaces for those who could afford long afternoons of leisure. Judging by the slow, meandering flow of conversation here, it might be both. The server returns, this time carrying a small lacquer tray of candied fruits and sesame cakes. He explains that the slight sweetness is meant to balance the mind after the tea's astringency. You bite into one, soft, chewy, and just enough sugar to make the next sip taste even rounder. At a corner table, a younger scholar is sketching with a brush, not words but the swirling steam rising from his own cup. He tells you it's part of a study in capturing the ungraspable, which you decide is either genius or a good excuse to avoid finishing an essay. Nearby, another man recites verses aloud, his voice low and musical while the others listen in respectful silence. From the open window, you catch a glimpse of the street beyond. Sunlight glancing off tiled roofs, a boy chasing a paper kite, the slow sway of laundry drying on bamboo poles. All of it feels far away in here, as if the tea house exists in its own measured bubble of time. The merchant leans toward you and whispers about the tea contests that sometimes happen here. Guests compete to identify the origin of a tea after a single sip, or to pour without spilling a drop onto the saucer. The loser buys the next pot, of course. You ask if he's ever lost, and he smiles in a way that suggests either deep confidence or very selective memory. As the afternoon deepens, the scholars begin speaking more softly, their voices merging with the steady trickle of tea from pot to cup. A breeze stirs the wisteria outside, sending pale petals drifting onto the tatami mats. One lands beside your cup, and you leave it there, a quiet bookmark in this unhurried moment. You can almost feel your own pulse slow to match the rhythm here. Pour, sip, pause, speak, listen. Pour again. The conversations don't resolve into conclusions so much as circle back to where they began, like leaves floating in a pond. And you think, that's probably the point. When you finally rise to leave, no one seems surprised. They nod politely as if you've merely stepped out for a moment and might return any day. The merchant guides you back into the alley, and the sound of the city swells again, carrying you forward to wherever the next cup might be waiting. The next morning finds you in a different part of Changhuan, where the city feels more like a living map of trade routes than a fixed place. Narrow lanes weave between warehouses, and the air is a layered blend of incense, spices, leather, and the faint metallic tang of coins changing hands. This is the merchant's quarter, the place where tea leaves, still fragrant from far-off mountains, meet the relentless machinery of commerce. A man in a broad straw hat beckons you into a courtyard piled high with tightly wrapped bales. He slices one open to reveal dense, dark cakes of tea, each stamped with a seal so intricate you suspect it doubles as a form of advertisement. These are bound for caravans heading west, he tells you, part of the ongoing tide of goods that flows along the Silk Roads. Tea will travel with bolts of silk, carved jade and lacquerware, crossing deserts and mountains until it reaches cities you've only heard of in half-remembered stories. You watch as workers load the tea onto low, sturdy carts, binding the stacks with rope in patterns so symmetrical they almost look ceremonial. Beyond the gates, the caravan is already forming, a long, swaying procession of camels, their steps steady as a metronome. The drivers call to each other in languages you don't recognize, but the tone is easy, familiar. They've done this before and they'll do it again, season after season. A merchant explains that tea is not just for drinking. In many Western markets, compressed tea cakes serve as currency. A block might pay for a horse, a bag of peppercorns, or a pair of wool cloaks. He lifts a cake to show you its weight. It's heavier than it looks, and you understand immediately how it might feel like both a luxury and a necessity. Further along the street, another warehouse specializes in loose leaf tea. Here the air is softer, almost floral. You see long wooden troughs where workers separate leaves by size and sheen, their fingers moving so fast you'd think they were playing a musical instrument. Every few minutes, a supervisor pauses to inspect a handful against the light, looking for some quality that remains invisible to you. It's here you meet a woman who calls herself a tea fixer. Her job is to blend teas from different regions, so they taste as though they've come from the same mountain. She speaks with the precision of a jeweler, describing how even a single misplaced leaf can alter the entire flavor. The road changes tea, she tells you. Cold air makes it sharper, heat makes it heavy. By the time it reaches a buyer, it must still taste like home. As she works, she hums softly, a tune you almost recognize but can't place. Outside, a boy sweeps fallen leaves from the courtyard, the broom rasping against the stones. Every sound here seems to have its own rhythm, part of a larger composition made up of haggling voices, camel bells, and the sigh of wind through canvas awnings. Later, you step into a small tea stall wedged between two larger warehouses. It serves as a kind of neutral ground for merchants to negotiate deals. Two men sit across from each other, cups in hand, speaking in low tones. You can tell the deal is going well because neither has stopped to glance at the door. Here, tea is not a distraction from business. It is the business. In a corner, a wall map shows the branching lines of the Silk Roads, marked with small red dots for trading posts. The merchant running the stall traces one finger along the path from Chang'an to Samarkand, then to Baghdad, then further west. Tea changes hands 100 times, he says, but it always carries the mountain in its scent. When you leave the quarter, you pass the caravan again, now fully assembled and swaying into motion. The lead camel wears a string of bronze bells that chime softly, each note fading into the hum of the city. You stand there for a while, watching them disappear into the dusty horizon, realizing that each bale carries more than leaves. It carries stories, flavors, and the possibility of something unexpected waiting in a cup thousands of miles away. By afternoon, the sun dips into a softer gold, and the city's pace shifts. The streets near the Scholars' Quarter become quieter, as if the air itself is holding its breath. Here, tea serves a different purpose, not for trade, not for status, but for thought. You step into a tea house known among literati as the Pavilion of Lingering Fragrance. Its entrance is modest, plain wooden doors, unpainted, but the moment you cross the threshold, the scent changes. The air is warm and layered with the perfume of rare teas, sandalwood, and faint ink from nearby calligraphy desks. The room is arranged with low lacquered tables, each paired with a cushion embroidered in muted silk. Scholars, poets, and minor officials sit in small groups, leaning over cups as if every swirl of steam might reveal a line of verse or solution to an ancient riddle. A host in pale robes greets you with a bow, then guides you to a corner table. He places before you a clay teapot so small, it looks like it could fit in the palm of your hand. Beside it rests a bamboo tray with a neat row of cups, each no bigger than a walnut shell. The host explains in a soft voice that this tea, picked at dawn from mist-covered slopes, is brewed 3 times in succession, each infusion revealing a different aspect of its character. Around you, conversations unfold in an elegant murmur. At one table, a group debates the moral lessons hidden in an old poem about cranes. At another, a young man sketches the outline of a mountain on rice paper, his brush pausing only when he sips his tea. Occasionally, someone recites a verse aloud, their voice clear and deliberate, and a few heads nod in silent appreciation. The brewing ritual here is almost hypnotic. The host warms the cups first, letting steam rise in delicate curls before pouring the first amber infusion. He waits exactly the length of a breath before serving, so the tea arrives neither scalding nor cooled. The taste is bright at first, then deepens into something that lingers at the back of your tongue. floral, slightly sweet with a whisper of earth. As you sip, you notice an older man at the next table studying a scroll. His beard is long but carefully combed, and his eyes have the distant look of someone who measures time not in minutes but in thoughts completed. He glances at you, then pours from his own pot into your cup without asking. Tea, he says, is not meant to be owned. It is meant to be shared. This simple act changes the mood at your table. Soon, a poet joins you, carrying a half-finished verse about the moon over Chang'an. Another man, a painter of mountain landscapes, pulls out a tiny inkstone and sketches the curve of your teacup. In this room, introductions happen not with names but with offerings of tea, of art, of ideas. The talk drifts from Tang poetry to Taoist philosophy, to the strange dreams brought on by late-night tea drinking. Someone tells a story about a tea so rare it could only be brewed once every 10 years, and everyone laughs, though you can't tell if they're laughing at the rarity or at the absurdity of trying to measure time in teapots. As the sun begins to set, the tea house lamps are lit. Paper lanterns that soften every edge and make steam look like drifting clouds. Your last sip is cooler now, but somehow sweeter, as if it has absorbed the warmth of the company around you. When you step outside, the street feels hushed, almost as if you've left a different world. Yet the faint, lingering fragrance in your sleeve reminds you that you've only carried a part of it with you, just enough to make you want to return. Night settles over Chang'an with the ease of silk sliding from a table. Lanterns bloom along the avenues, their paper shades casting warm circles onto the packed earth. The bustle has not ended, merely softened. Shopkeepers call less urgently now, voices low and unhurried. The scent of sesame oil and grilled lamb drifts from street stalls, mingling with the sharper tang of pickled vegetables. You follow a narrower lane toward the southern market district, where tea takes on yet another face. No longer the domain of nobles or scholars, but of travelers, laborers, and storytellers. Here, tea is brewed in dented kettles over open braziers, poured into thick ceramic mugs that can withstand a careless hand. The leaves are not rare, nor the water measured to the breath. Instead, the tea is strong, brisk, meant to warm the body rather than inspire a poem. A stall near the corner catches your attention. Its roof is nothing more than woven reed mats, but the glow from within is inviting. Inside, a woman with sleeves rolled up to the elbow stirs a pot with a bamboo ladle, her movements sure and unhurried. Beside her, a young boy fans the brazier, sending sparks upward. She ladles tea into a mug and slides it across the counter toward a man whose face is weathered by wind and road dust. "Been on the road long?" she asks him. 3 weeks, he says, sipping without waiting for it to cool. "From Dunhuang, sand still in my teeth." Her laughter is quick like a struck bell. She refills his cup before he asks. The boy slips a handful of candied walnuts onto the counter, a small kindness that will be remembered more than the tea itself. A man at the next table waves you over. His hair is streaked with gray, and his eyes have the restless spark of one who has crossed many frontiers. He leans close as you sit. "Care to hear a story? It'll go better with a drink." Without waiting, he signals to the woman for another mug. His tale begins with a caravan lost in the mountains and ends with a teapot made of silver that supposedly sang when the water boiled. Between these points, the thread wanders, through the markets of Samarkand, the snowfields of the Pamirs, and a night spent hiding from bandits in a collapsed watchtower. His voice rises and falls like the road itself, and you find yourself gripping the mug as if its heat anchors you in the here and now. Around you, other stories weave into the air. Laughter at a joke about a goat that wandered into the governor's courtyard, a quiet argument over whether the moon looks better over water or over snow. The clink of mugs, the scrape of stools, the low hiss of the brazier. These sounds form a rhythm more soothing than any formal music. When your storyteller drains the last of his tea, he sighs in contentment. "Tea keeps the road in your bones warm," he says, "even when you've stopped walking." The woman behind the counter begins stacking mugs, and the boy carefully folds the reed mats against the cool night air. You step outside once more, the street dimmer now, the air touched with the scent of wet stone. Somewhere in the distance, a watchman's wooden clapper marks the hour. The road ahead is quiet, but you walk slowly, savoring the lingering heat in your hands, and the way the night seems to carry the taste of tea long after the last drop is gone. The southern market fades behind you, replaced by quieter streets where the paving stones glisten with a fine sheen of mist. Chang'an, even at rest, holds a kind of gentle hum, as though the city itself is breathing slowly, in rhythm with the night. The air has cooled, and your footsteps sound softer now, cushioned by the dampness in the air. Ahead, a row of narrow courtyards lies tucked behind wooden gates. Faint lamplight seeps through the cracks, hinting at lives unfolding unseen. Somewhere, a brush scratches against paper, perhaps a clerk finishing his accounts by oil lamp. Elsewhere, a baby's thin cry rises and is soothed by a lullaby you can barely hear. You turn toward a bridge that spans one of the city's lesser canals. Here the water moves without hurry, reflecting a ribbon of moonlight. On the far side stands a tea house unlike the others you have seen today. It is small, hardly more than 2 rooms, but its doorway is framed by carved panels depicting cranes among pine trees. A thin wisp of steam escapes from within, curling into the mist. Inside, the air is warm and faintly scented with chrysanthemum blossoms. There are no chairs here, only low wooden platforms with cushions. A handful of patrons sit in companionable silence, their mugs resting beside small clay teapots. The host, an elderly man with a beard as white as rice flour, greets you with a bow that is neither hurried nor ceremonial, just the steady courtesy of one who has poured tea for decades. "You've walked far," he observes, pouring from a pot whose spout gleams like polished jade. "This tea is for the hour between waking and sleep." He sets a cup before you. The liquid is pale gold, almost luminous. You lift it, inhale, and find that the steam carries the faintest trace of honey and earth. The first sip is quiet in the mouth, soft, floral, yet it leaves behind a warmth that deepens slowly, like an ember under ash. Across from you, a woman in traveling robes hums to herself while tracing characters onto a strip of paper with a calligraphy brush. She pauses, dips the brush again, and glances up. "For dreams," she explains, nodding toward your cup. "The blossoms are dried under moonlight. Whether this is true or simply a gentle fiction, you do not ask. The tea seems to invite acceptance, not inquiry." The old host moves from table to table, refilling cups without breaking the stillness. Each motion is deliberate, lifting the pot, tilting just enough for the stream to arc cleanly, setting it down with a muted tap. The room feels outside of time, as though the city's noise has been pressed back behind a curtain. When you finish your cup, he pours another without a word. You realize this tea is not meant to hurry you toward the door. It is meant to hold you here until your own thoughts slow to match the pace of the water in the canal outside. At last you set your cup down and bow in thanks. The old man returns the gesture, his eyes narrowing in a smile. You step back into the night, the mist curling close around you, the carved cranes and pines fading into shadow. Somewhere ahead lies your lodging for the night, but the walk will be slow. The tea has worked its way into your limbs, turning each step into an unhurried measure. And as you cross the bridge once more, you find yourself thinking that in Chang'an, even the road to bed is lined with the taste of tea. The night deepens as you follow a lane lit only by the occasional paper lantern. Each one sways slightly in the damp air, casting soft, rounded shadows that seem to breathe along the walls. The city has not fallen silent. Chang'an never quite does, but its sounds have softened to a background murmur. The creak of a distant gate, the faint roll of cartwheels on stone, the echo of a laugh from an unseen courtyard. Your path bends toward a cluster of small workshops, closed now but still carrying the scent of their craft. One smells faintly of pine shavings and tung oil, perhaps a carpentry shop where tables and chests are planed smooth under a craftsman's hand. Another carries the rich tang of indigo dye, a blue so deep it seems to drink in the lamplight. Beyond these, you pass a courtyard where silk threads hang in long, shimmering cascades, strung from beam to beam. Even in the dimness, they catch the light of the moon like thin waterfalls. Somewhere inside, a loom creaks once, twice, and then falls quiet again. The lane narrows, flanked by brick walls mottled with age. Your hand brushes the rough surface as you walk, feeling the faint warmth the stones have kept from the day. At a corner, you hear a soft scuff of movement and find a cat, white with a single black ear, watching you from atop a wall. Its tail curls like a question mark, but it does not flee. It simply blinks, slow and unafraid, before turning away into the dark. A small bridge appears ahead, this one without railings, only the gentle hump of stone over a narrow waterway. The canal below is calm enough to mirror the stars. On the far side, the street opens into a square where a handful of night vendors remain. They tend small stoves and braziers, their flames flickering against makeshift awnings. One stall draws you with the scent of roasted chestnuts, their shells split open to reveal pale gold inside. The vendor, a woman with her hair wrapped in a faded green scarf, offers a quiet greeting and gestures toward the steaming basket. You take a small paper cone of them, their heat warming your hands through the thin wrapping. The first bite is soft, sweet, and earthy, and you eat slowly, letting the warmth spread through you. In another corner of the square, a man stirs a pot over a charcoal stove. The steam carries hints of ginger and scallions, and though you are not hungry enough for another meal, the smell feels like a memory you can't quite place. A pair of lanterns mark the entrance to your lodging for the night. The building is modest, its wooden door set into a frame polished smooth by many years of use. Inside, the host greets you with a nod and a murmured welcome before leading you to a small upstairs room. The space is simple. A low bed with a folded quilt, a table by the window, and a small clay lamp whose flame wavers gently. You set down your belongings, the quiet of the room settling around you like a blanket. Outside, the sounds of Chang'an continue at a distance. Soft footsteps, a wheel turning, a faint note of a flute somewhere unseen. You sit by the window for a moment, watching the mist drift in the lamplight, the chestnuts cooling in their paper cone beside you. The night feels unhurried, as though it could stretch forever, carrying you along in its slow, even rhythm. You lie back on the low bed, the quilt folded neatly over you, its weight neither heavy nor light, just enough to anchor you in place. The clay lamp throws a small, steady glow across the wooden ceiling beams, and you watch the light flicker as though it breathes in time with the city outside. Somewhere beyond the walls, a night bird calls once, then again, the sound soft but clear in the stillness. It blends with the faint rush of water from the canal, creating a rhythm that feels older than the city itself. Your eyes drift to the window. Through the open shutter, you can see a thin ribbon of sky, the stars dim yet persistent above the faint veil of mist. A single lantern from the street below sways gently, its paper sides glowing the color of amber tea. You think back to the day's walk, the hidden alleys, the scent of indigo, the quiet bridge without rails, and each memory arrives like a slow tide, settling calmly in your mind. From the floorboards below comes the muffled sound of the innkeeper adjusting something, perhaps stacking firewood for the small stove. The smell of the fresh wood drifts upward, mingling with a trace of chestnut sweetness still lingering in the room. Your breathing matches the city's pace, slow, unhurried, without urgency. The quilt's texture beneath your hands feels worn and softened by many nights like this, as if countless travelers have rested here and found the same quiet. Outside, a breeze rises and fades, the paper lantern rocking once more. Then comes the stillness again, deep enough to make you feel as though time has loosened its grip. You close your eyes. The sounds, the scents, the weight of the quilt, all of it folds together and the edges of the night blur. The first sounds you notice in the morning are not loud nor urgent. They are the careful, deliberate noises of a city waking up at its own pace. A distant clink of pottery lids, a broom brushing against stone, a soft splash as someone tips a bucket of water into the gutter. Your eyes open slowly to the muted daylight filtering through the paper screen. It is not harsh. The Tang-Dynasty sun seems to know that mornings should arrive gently, like a whisper rather than a shout. You rise and slip into your robe, the fabric cool against your skin. The floorboards creak softly, acknowledging your movement. When you step to the window, the air carries a scent you can't quite name. Part steamed rice, part wet earth, part something floral that you suspect comes from the courtyard's hidden garden. Down in the street, merchants arrange their stalls with the same quiet choreography you saw last night. One man is stacking baskets of green tea leaves, some rolled tight as pearls, others loose and feathery. Another ties bundles of fresh herbs, their stems still glistening from the morning dew. A young boy runs past carrying a tray of clay cups, careful not to spill the water inside. His bare feet slap against the stones in a rhythm that makes you think of a heartbeat. Quick, alive, brimming with the day ahead. The innkeeper greets you in that half-smile way people do when they have already been awake for hours. He offers a small bowl of millet porridge, steaming gently, The grains soften to perfection. You accept, and with each spoonful, the warmth moves outward from your chest, settling into your hands and toes. Somewhere beyond the market, a tea house bell rings, three clear tones that carry through the morning air. It feels less like an announcement and more like an invitation. You decide you will follow it. You step out into the morning light, the cobblestones still damp from last night's rain. Each step sends a faint, clean scent upward, as if the earth itself had been rinsed and wrung out. The air is cool enough to wake you fully, but not so cold as to rush your movements. The tea house sits at the far end of the market street, framed by a pair of curved wooden beams carved with cloud motifs. A red paper lantern sways gently above the entrance, catching the breeze like a slow heartbeat. As you push open the sliding door, the sound changes. Outside noise becomes muffled, replaced by the layered tones of soft conversation, the clink of porcelain, and the muted thud of a bamboo whisk against a clay bowl. Inside, the walls are lined with bamboo shelves stacked with tea jars, each labeled in a looping script. Some bear familiar names: Dragonwell, Jasmine, Cloud Mist, while others are more mysterious: White Monkey, Sparrow's Tongue, Buddha's Eyebrow. You can't help but think half these names sound like the Tang-Dynasty version of indie band titles. A hostess guides you to a low table near the open courtyard. The sun filters through the wooden lattice, casting patterns like ripples over the polished surface. She brings a small tray, 2 cups, a pot, and a lacquered bowl of tea leaves. The leaves are delicate, each curled in on itself like it's holding a secret. As she pours the first rinse, steam rises in a lazy spiral, carrying a scent that's green, sweet, and just faintly nutty. She explains, in the slow, precise cadence of someone who's recited this hundreds of times, that this is a high mountain green tea, picked in the early spring when the buds are still furred with silver down. Historians still argue whether Tang tea culture leaned more toward green or brick tea in its true golden age. But here, at this table, the debate feels blissfully irrelevant. The first sip is like a memory you didn't know you had. Soft, round, with a faint floral note that lingers at the edges of your tongue. The hostess smiles, not in pride, but in quiet satisfaction, as if your reaction is confirmation that the morning has unfolded exactly as it should. Outside, a sparrow hops along the courtyard wall, tilting its head at you. It flits away before you can blink, but somehow its brief presence leaves the air feeling lighter. You stay for a second pot. The second pot drains more slowly than the first, partly because the leaves have fully opened, partly because you're in no rush to see the bottom. The tea cools slightly, its sweetness deepening, a soft counterpoint to the crisp morning air drifting in from the courtyard. Around you, the tea house moves at its own pace. Servers glide past with trays balanced effortlessly, guests speak in voices low enough to blend into the background, and a guqin's muted notes float from a corner, where an elderly man plucks at silk strings. The melody feels ancient, the kind of tune that could have been played in a Tang palace or in a farmer's kitchen with equal grace. Your hostess returns to ask if you'd like to try something different. Perhaps a fermented brick tea brought from the far west, wrapped in bamboo leaf and aged for years. She sets it down without fanfare, just a block of compressed leaves with a scent both earthy and faintly smoky, like a library that also happens to be a mountain cave. She explains, almost as an afterthought, that camel caravans once carried such tea along the Silk Road, trading it for salt, horses, or even jade. You break off a small piece. As it steeps, the liquor turns a deep amber, catching the light like polished wood. The taste is bold but rounded, a reminder that tea can be comfort and challenge at the same time. Historians still argue whether fermented teas were widely consumed in Tang daily life or reserved for special exchanges. But sipping it here, the question feels like a pleasant kind of academic trivia. By now the courtyard has shifted. Sunlight sharpens, shadows pull tighter. A boy sweeps fallen blossoms into a neat pile near the wall, the petals pale as faded parchment. Somewhere beyond the street, you hear the first notes of market music rising. You realize you could stay here for hours watching light and steam dance together, but the story has carried you full circle. The Tang-Dynasty tea journey has been tasted, felt, and breathed in, each detail settling like a fine layer of leaves at the bottom of your memory. And now, let the pace soften. You lean back from the table, letting your hands rest in your lap, feeling the gentle warmth of tea lingering in your chest. The air is slow here, unhurried, as if the city outside has taken a collective breath and decided to hold it just for you. The scents, floral, nutty, faintly smoky, float in the stillness, not demanding attention, only existing in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Light filters through the lattice in long, slanted beams, warm enough to touch the skin but soft enough to feel like a whisper. The sounds fade into layers, the distant sweep of a broom, the rustle of leaves beyond the courtyard wall, the low hum of conversation that blends into something closer to a lullaby. You close your eyes, picturing the long road that brought tea here, from mountain terraces where dew still clung to each leaf, to river barges carrying crates through morning mist, to the hands of those who knew exactly how to coax flavor from silence. Breathing slow, you let your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench. The tension you didn't know you were holding melts away, seeping down into the soles of your feet. There's no need to move quickly now, no need to decide what comes next. Just you, the memory of warm porcelain, and the faint aftertaste of spring. And when you finally rise, the city will still be there. Brighter, louder, busier. But you'll carry this calm with you like a small, perfect cup of tea, balanced steady in the palm of your hand.